Good evening and welcome to the weird and the wonderful with strange bones. That's me. And we've been going around the world and looking at varying places, looking at the ghosts and cryptids. And we're getting to a point where shortly we are going to start talking about some of the things that we have learnt. But before we do that, we are going to do one more particularly interesting place just to round off our beginnings, as it were, so to speak, to coin a phrase. And we are going to go to Canada. Now, what can we say about Canada? It is far to the north. It can at times be immensely cold, and it can be quite warm. It is very flat, apparently, and it is very, very large. So lots of open space and quite a bit of interesting history. So let's start off and see where we can begin with the ghosts of Canada. Well, as we troll along through varying things, we can say that Canada is rife with ghost stories and paranormal legends, many tied to the historical events and places around the place. We know that there is a long history of both indigenous cultures and cultures that arrived. Hey there, Evie. Good of you to join in. So let's have a quick look at the kind of ghosts we can expect to discover. Now, one such place is Peggy's Cove, where the ghost of a young woman said to be a fisherman's daughter is said to haunt the village of Peggy's Cove. Another one which is quite interesting is the ghost of an architect who haunts the very hotel he designed, particularly the ballroom of the Empress Hotel, which is quite an interesting one. Another haunted hotel we can discover is that of the Banff Springs Hotel, where a porter died in a tragic accident and is seen throughout the hotel, but especially the lower floors. There is the Mackenzie River ghost, where on the Mackenzie River there is an apparition that appears and has done since the 1850s. There's the Baldon mystery in the sheep farming settlement in Ontario, all the way back from the 1820s. And of course, there's the famous ghost of Tom Thompson, who was an artist in Algonquin Park, who died in 1917 and for reasons uncertain appears on Canoe Lake in a grey canoe, which is a rather interesting one, that we have a vehicle with said ghost. And then, of course, there is the lighthouse on Toronto Island said to be haunted by the former keeper who was murdered in 1815. Very old lighthouses are, in fact, quite interesting in that it is said that it was a terribly lonely existence being a lighthouse keeper back in the day, and often people that did the job went a little strange, if not outright insane. So perhaps that added to the possibility of there becoming a ghost along with the murder. Hey there to Junior John and Morogadi, yes. And to Colin, welcome, welcome, welcome. It's good to have you alongside. do join in, share, and get other people in. And shortly I will do some invites if you want to join in and offer your opinions and comments on what we are dealing with. Another fascinating one, which is also in line with a number of other ones we've seen in other countries, is the Trappist monastery in Manitoba, where the ruins of the monastery are haunted by something or someone, or maybe multiple someones. And then another one which is most interesting is the Bankhead ghost town, which is an abandoned town. And we have found that in a number of places, wherever there is abandoned places, ghosts seem to arise. So, to Junior John, 1 second, people. I do apologize for that. What is my live about? My live is an exploration into the weird and the wonderful, into the ghosts and cryptids of varying places around the world, with an aim to discover whether or not there are commonalities despite culture or location, and to see if we can learn anything or understand anything about any of these things and decide for ourselves whether or not they may in fact be real. It seems that pretty much everybody agrees that ghosts are real, but what about other things? Hey there to the Emperor's Son, welcome, welcome, it's good to have you back. So, looking at the varied ghosts in Canada, we see there's quite a few places around that they say haunt the varied locales and turn up in all kinds of places, which I think is absolutely a fascinating set of interesting things. So, looking at a few of the famous ones that we've just briefly mentioned, let's start at least with talking about one which I think is a rather nice one, the Mackenzie River ghosts. It's one of the oldest ghost stories in Canada, going back to the 1850s, and apparently was once widely known around Europe. The gentleman in question was Augustus Richard Piers, a fur trader and the post manager of Hudson's Bay, who died at the age of 33 in Fort McPherson in the Northwest Territories, extreme north, where it is, of course, immensely cold. And his frozen body was transported back to Fort Simpson for permanent burial. But as they were doing it, which at the time and in those days, of course, was not easy to do and had to be done by dog sled, his voice could be heard ordering the party on, marche, walk, and it drove the dog sled on the sled quite mad. So it seems that, dead as he was quite keen to get home. Welcome to Elder Bingy Cindy. Let me see if we can add anybody, if anybody is keen to join in. Here we go. And we will, of course, be sending out invites to people to add along the way if anybody is interested, or if you would just like to comment, do comment, give your opinions. The Baldoon Mystery, which started in the late 1820s in the vacant Baldoon sheep farming settlement between Wallaceburg and Chatham in southwestern Ontario is a case of classic poltergeist. Interestingly enough, as we know from what we have found thus far in varying cultures and countries, some ghosts are just that. They are merely apparitions that we might find scary but don't do anything at all. They're quite harmless. But there are a few out there that are something more. And it seems that this particular mystery involved a rather angry poltergeist. A poltergeist, of course, comes from the German, meaning a noisy spirit, and usually refers to one which affects the physical world in some way. This one included bullets, stones, and lead pellets raining down upon a farmer's home, as well as fire from the sky. Bricks smashed windows as if of their own accord, and a baby in its cradle was rocked by an unseen hand. Chairs slid across the floors, and these events continued over the years, on and on, until finally in 1831 the home burnt down and the events finally ceased. Now, this is a very interesting one, just in case you happen to be interested in that reality, insofar that one of the poltergeist cases which I was actually present at involved one which moved things, stole objects, and hid them around the house, and even set fire to the curtains at one stage. Um, and these things only stopped in this poor family's home when finally the local chief, this was in South Africa in northern KwaZulu Natal, and the local chief took matters into his own hands and went out and ordered the community to build a new house for the family further away, and then had the entire house burnt to ashes. And then the strange happenings stopped. There were attempts by the exorcist that I was with at the time, who was a Catholic priest, to exorcise the house, but after 3 attempts, all of which failed, they had to admit that whatever was there was far more. No, I was not a ghostbuster or anything like that. I was, in fact, a young friar in the Catholic Church, and it so happened that the priest with which I would work at the time was the exorcist for the Catholic Church for KwaZulu Natal. And the house in question we visited fairly often in order to say Mass. It was in quite a far out community. There were no churches in the area at the time. And so it seemed that whatever was in the house took exception to Mass being said in the house. He didn't like it at all and would steal items from the uh, table that was used as an altar, and, as I say, set fire to the curtains one day even, and did a number of things that really could not be explained in any manner or form. So it was a rather interesting event, and in my time as a young friar, um, I did see a number of fascinating and somewhat frightening things. Uh, these days, of course, I have in fact left the Catholic Church. I'm no longer a friar, but that was a very interesting one. Now we have a question that's just come in. Uh, Not in entirely certain what you're asking, but what I think you're asking is there such a thing as exorcisms? Well, in the Catholic Church, while it is not spoken of very, very much, exorcisms are absolutely still to this day a thing. They are believed in. There is a lot more science involved nowadays, whereby, um, especially in the case of possession or anything like that, they do check for mental instability or things like that, and there is a fair amount of examination before an exorcism takes place, that there isn't natural means that might explain it away. But in the event of it being something that it is believed to be supernatural or in some way demonic, they absolutely will have an exorcist do something. In the Catholic Church, while technically any priest can perform an exorcism, it is strongly uh, unadvisable, and there is usually a specific priest who is designated as the exorcist who receives training in that regard. Um, And of course, there is a whole process to go through even before going to the location of prayer, fasting, and a number of other things in that regard to prepare oneself, confessions said, and all the rest of it, because it is taken very, very seriously. It is absolutely not considered to be a joke in any manner or form. It is very interesting, and I discovered this talking with some of the other people, including a fellow who is often on our channel, the Emperor's Son, who is in fact a Muslim, that while these things are believed in, it is always a specific person who would be given the task of managing it, somebody specially trained. And the really interesting part is that it's something that isn't taught. Very often you will find they will say to you, okay, that's evil, don't deal with it, don't touch it, don't get involved. Um, they will say, you mustn't mess around with Ouija boards, you mustn't deal with ghosts, etc., etc. But they never really tell you much anything else about it, only it's bad, don't touch kind of thing. So it's true in Islam and it's true in the Catholic Church very much. Um, in the somewhat limited research I have done, the only religion that really gives you any real explanations to the common person, shall we say, on the evil that is out there, would be Hinduism. They don't seem to mind warning you in more detail, but many of the other major religions simply do not tell you anything. Um, until something happens and then they send in a professional. It's very Men in Black in a strange kind of way. And the reason why that might be is not a thing I could truly answer. I know um, even when I was studying, and I mean, I did the full study to become a priest. I completed my training uh, in everything, but we were never really taught much about. We were told that it exists, that there are prayers, and so on and so forth, but no real details given at all. And it was only because I actually was fortunate enough to work alongside this exorcist that I learned a lot more than others. And I think in many ways they were hoping that I might in fact become the next one for the area, and they were sort of giving me extra training to see if I might be suitable in that way. So, absolutely, it's not a taught thing, but it is absolutely part of belief. It is fully there. Um, if you are a Catholic, at least, and I believe for the most part, if you are a Christian of any of the mainline Christian groups, uh, Demons are real, you must believe in them. Ghosts are real, you must believe in them. They are there, and they are not to be dealt with by you, basically. That's kind of the long and the short of it. And it's weird to think why this might be. Um, why didn't I become an exorcist? I left the church. I stopped being a friar. Just so that you guys know, in the Catholic Church, there are a number of religious groups. There is a separation, obviously, between the male religious groups and the female religious groups. Not all priests are what they call religious. Um, you can be a diocesan priest, which is straight up just a priest. But if you think back to your legends of Robin Hood, you had Friar Tuck. Well, Friar Tuck was a friar. Now, a friar is not a monk. Not all of the religious orders are monks. Not all are friars. Not all are either. There are societies. So the Jesuits are neither monks nor friars. They are a society. And there is a whole and complicated history surrounding who is what and why. And you can be a brother without being a priest. But many brothers are also priests. It depends. I belonged to a friar or fraternal order. So, in that case, to give you that background, we were mendicant and missionary, and for that way, we did not live in a monastery. Monks live in a monastery and stay in one place for the most part, not entirely these days, but usually mostly. Friars do not. So, to give you that background, it was a very specific kind of religious order. Um, the more you believe in them, the more they come true. That's an interesting point, and I think we should add it to our list of questions that we have about ghosts as we proceed with our examination, because it's certainly something which people do say in many occasions, that the more you believe in them, the stronger they can become. Perhaps that's why the mainline religions, by and large, do not tell you too much about it, simply because they want to limit belief, maybe. It's a fair point. Not sure. I think it's something that we will have to look into as we go. But moving along with another interesting one, we have the story of the Wynerd apparition, which goes all the way back to 1785, when British Army Lieutenant George Wynerd and Captain John C. Sherbrooke, the future Governor General of British North America, sat in Wynerd's rooms in Sydney, NS, conversing by the fire. And while they sat there in good colonial fashion, possibly enjoying a good drink, the figure of a tall young man appeared by the closed doorway. Wynerd's face turned ashen. The youth looked at him, then moved over by the fire and walked straight through a door. It was Wynerd's favourite brother, who at the time was meant to be in England. Wynerd later learned that he had died at the age of 20, at the very moment that he had appeared to Sydney. So, not a bad ghost in any manner or form, simply one passing through to let a brother perhaps that he loved know that in fact, well, he wasn't around anymore. So, who's to say? It's certainly something that does come up, and many stories that people have told me of um, loved ones that they have said absolutely did appear to them, if only once, to let them know, if you will, that they had gone on. So that's absolutely a very common story, not as famous or as well known by the general public, shall we say, simply because it tends to be a personal or private kind of a ghost, but nevertheless, absolutely. Now, another interesting one is the Great Amherst Mystery from the 1870s, where a cottage that once stood in Amherst and the corner of Princess and Church, which may or may not be ironic, um, young Esther Cox, sickly and broken-hearted, was tormented by a poltergeist. Her arms and legs would balloon to enormous sizes, and bedsheets flew through the air. On her bedroom wall one night appeared the words scrawled, "Esther Cox, you are mine to kill." Eventually, however, it seemed that the disturbances faded away, and Esther Cox recovered, left to move to New England, which is quite far away, and I can't say I blame her, and she married. So, a very interesting one. Why was the ghost so angry with her? What was going on that it was upset? None of this is reported, and perhaps none of this was known. Perhaps the ghost was simply messing with her mind. Certainly, it seemed to work. Now, in the 19th century, late 19th century, just outside of Charlottetown, in a house uh, in Binstead, the house itself rumbled. Shrieks and moans could be heard, and at the end of each episode of screaming, voices could be heard to emanate from beneath a tree outside the dining room window, whose branches touched the upside bedroom, the focal point of the phenomena. And it is said that repeatedly a woman with a baby in her arms was seen there. But why voices and not just one voice? Was the woman being haunted even though dead? It's a strange and interesting one uh, that perhaps we cannot answer, but certainly seems to imply that not all ghosts are all that happy after all. So who knows, who knows, who knows? Hey there, Mela. Hey there, Princess Laracoli. Welcome, welcome. Now, William Lyon Mackenzie King, Prime Minister of Canada between 1935 and 1948, was a fellow that in secret had spiritualist pursuits. Now, for those of you who don't know, this was a craze that went through quite large portions of Europe, and it was known as the spiritualist movement, where it became very fashionable in society to attempt to contact the dead. And there were a great many so-called spiritualists who claimed that they could speak to the dead, manifest ectoplasm, and all of that fun stuff that uh, very, very often was in fact complete fakery, but nevertheless they charged huge prices for. But there are those who they say were real. Now, this particular prime minister believed that it permitted him to maintain solid relationships with friends who were no longer around, and even his mother. However, after his own death, his good friend Percy Phillip, the Ottawa correspondent for the New York Times, told the CBC he had traveled to the Mackenzie King estate outside Ottawa called Moorside in the Gatineau Park, where he carried on a long conversation with the ghost of the Prime Minister, who said, "Be still and listen and feel, and you will be able to make contact." And this is exactly what Philip did. And he said that when he was there, he felt a presence and said in a loud voice, "Good evening, Mr. King." And following this, the presence sat beside him, and a long conversation thereafter was pursued between the two. Now, what's interesting is we are not only talking of a rather important public figure, but a journalist as well, who claimed that absolutely it was real. So it seems that we have quite a lot, and I know it's a terrible trope that Canadians are always so polite, but it seems that their ghosts are. So who is to say? Now, the next ghost is halfway between a ghost and a cryptid, and this is where we are finding our crossovers with other countries we have visited already. In India, we had ghouls. In Romania, we had vampires. In Mexico, we had kind of ghouls. In South Africa, of course, we've the Tokolosh. In Côte d'Azur, we had drowners in the waters, and in Canada, we have the Wendigo. Now, this comes from the Algonquin belief system that's said to be a ghost or spirit of some variety that actually possesses a person, causing them to lust after human flesh. Now, while many of the Wendigo stories are associated with Northwest Ontario, where in 1907, at a settlement just north of the town of Red Lake, the brothers Jack and Joseph Fiddler were arrested for a murder of Joseph's daughter-in-law, who they said they had found turned into a Wendigo, and they were forced to kill. Jack later committed suicide and admitted to killing 14 such Wendigos in his life, while his brother died in jail 2 years later. Now, this is an interesting one because it seems that a Wendigo comes up in a number of American stories, absolutely, which is very, very interesting. But in the Algonquin version, the Wendigo is not the individual itself. In a brief examination we did in one of our earlier lives about the Wendigo, it was pointed out that this was somebody who was so evil that they become a Wendigo, and it is because they went and turned to cannibalism and evil. Whereas in this version, in the Algonquin belief system, it is a ghost which possesses an individual and forces them to become a ghoul of some kind. So the person themselves is just a normal human being, but the spirit that possesses them is something more. So a little bit of a twist on the one we are usually knowing and hearing about. So absolutely an interesting crossover there. The next violent and awful ghost is the Dag poltergeist, which took place in Portage du Fort, Quay, west of Shawville on the Ottawa River, around the home and farm of George Dag. The disturbance centered around Dinah, a Scottish orphan who had joined the Dag family, and began in 1889 and this again seems to be a commonality for poltergeists, which we shall add to our list of knowledge, that it began with a series of spontaneous erupting fires around the home. Soon stones were thrown through windows by unseen hands, and household objects, milk jugs, a butter churn, and a wash basin, floated through the earth. Dinah was heard conversing with a deep, disembodied voice who answered her questions. This went on for 3 months, after which the haunting inexplicably simply ceased and never happened again. So, what might that be? But most interestingly, we see another commonality from different cultures and countries around the world, that poltergeists seem to like fires. Hey there, Zayan. Hey there, Apple User. Welcome, welcome. If you would like to join, you are more than welcome to either join in on the live or just send me your comments. I would love to hear what you think. Now, it seems that we can say that ghosts are very much real, and some of them, for reasons we do not understand, can affect us and others cannot. Now, one which doesn't seem to have physical abilities, but somehow is part way between a ordinary ghost and a poltergeist, is one in Newfoundland. She is simply called the Old Hag, and it causes a variety, at least, of sleep paralysis. A ghostly figure that descends on her victims while they are asleep, lying on their chests, paralyzing them, making it very hard to breathe, and giving them awful nightmares of her presence. Those that wake up apparently all say they have seen the same thing, but those that do not wake in time, that do not break out of the dream, simply die. So there's an interesting set of ghosts, at least, that may or may not be real, but certainly does seem to fit to the stories such as we have encountered in places right around the world. We have been to Portugal, we have done South Africa, we have done Côte d'Azur, we have done Mexico, we have done Saudi Arabia, and yet, no matter the fact that the religions are so different, the cultures are so different, the commonalities are very much evident, which may or may not mean something. So let us proceed and see what else we know. We see that Banff Springs Hotel is well haunted and has in fact multiple ghosts. There is a young bride that died there. There is a bellman. They have an haunted room which is now sealed up, but the lights often turn on and off inside the room, even though nobody is in there. We have the Bowman's Art Center, where a young Chinese girl was beaten to death in the women's restroom after being mistaken for a boy in her traditional attire, and her ghost remains. Now, there again, we see in each case that it's either violence or tragedy that seems to be the strongest reason for a ghost occurring. The now decommissioned Charles Camsell Hospital, which at one time was regarded as a very important hospital, which was a former Jesuit college turned into a hospital, especially for people with tuberculosis. Though they didn't call it a hospital per se, they called it a sanatorium because back in the day, almost nobody recovered from tuberculosis. Medicine was not so well advanced, and people generally died. And it was regarded for a very long time as Alberta's most haunted building, um, full of many, many ghosts. And of course, the death from tuberculosis was a fairly painful and awful one, as you literally drowned as your own lungs filled with fluid. So, certainly a good cause for a ghost, I think. Um, Quite a lot of ghosts that died violently, but a number, in fact, that died tragically as well. In Dunvegan Provincial Park in Fairview, there is a woman who died in a snowstorm uh, while searching for her lost husband. It doesn't particularly say whether or not her husband survived, but her ghost is still out there searching. In the rectory of the church in the same place, there is a priest often seen working on his sermon at the desk there, even though the priest has been dead for a long time, very conscientious perhaps. And in the main bridge in the area, there is a barefoot woman in a long white cloak seen wandering, which again fits to another common ghost that appears despite varied cultures and places, and that, of course, is the White Lady, um, lost and mournful woman, usually who died tragically and sometimes violently, but with great sorrow and sometimes anger. Um, they have them in Canada too. So absolutely another one for the list of those that are very common, which I find very interesting as well. Now, what else do we have? The next one is one that perhaps fits to something which has been going on lately in a rather viral way. We all remember that very good movie, if you like horrors, The Conjuring. And we know that it featured that haunted doll, which I believe in some kind of promotion for the upcoming next movie in that series is being taken around America, and there was some outcry about it as they took it down to um, Louisiana, and on their journey down, apparently some quite awful things occurred along the way, and when they got there, the house that it was briefly in burnt to the ground. And it was said that this absolutely was a very bad idea. Now, it seems that Canada has a haunted doll, but in this particular one, the doll is normally not there. It just sometimes turns up in cupboards, um, along with a small boy. Then the two appear in the house without warning, and people say that the doll was certainly never there before, and it seems after a while it just disappears. So, who knows? Maybe haunted dolls are a thing and should be very much avoided. I must admit, I've never been fond of dolls, so perhaps I'm biased. But nevertheless, um, One which is very interesting is the Fairmont Hotel McDonald in Edmonton, and I like this one because one of the rarest of ghosts that you will ever discover is in fact the ghost of an animal. Now, at the time in 1914, obviously people did not have all the JBCs and fancy equipment that we get today, and horses were used for the hauling of things when buildings were constructed. And when they were pouring the building's foundation, there was a horse being used to move things around, and in fact dropped dead. Uh, who knows, perhaps from overwork or something like that. And the same horse is still there. For whatever reason, it has never particularly left. So, why that might be the case, I don't know. But it is nice to find another haunting of an animal. You don't often find that. Now, another place, and this one is tragedy rather than mere violence, which happened in 1903 in Crow's Nest Pass, and it was known as the Frank Slide, when a rock slide occurred that claimed 76 lives. Many of the bodies were never actually recovered because the extent of the landslide. And apparently, if you go there, you will see those who were there still there and apparently are not able to leave. So perhaps they are trying to find their way out, or maybe they are just stuck there forever no matter what. Hey Kai, welcome, welcome. Um, hard to say, hard to say. If you're enjoying what we're doing and what we're examining, um, do join this channel, and don't forget I try to come on pretty much every day around 10 to talk about these things, and we will of course recap at the end with what rules we have found to be the case, as it were. So we shall see. An interesting one which is almost backwards from the usual. We know that hospitals, especially abandoned hospitals, I'm being haunted by a cat, but don't worry, it's very much alive. Hospitals are very much a place for ghosts, but this is a hospital that became haunted as a result of where it was built. The hospital, which is still in operation, the Grace Hospital, was built on the land of a family where one of the family, a woman, Maudine Riley, died in childbirth. And the family lived on this particular plot of land for a very long time until eventually it was bought up and a hospital was constructed. And the woman is still there. So perhaps it's a sort of backwards version. She didn't die in the hospital, but the hospital is haunted because it was built where she died. It's an interesting one, but still fits to our standard view of how you get a ghost. She died tragically. Now, that fits with the La Boheme restaurant, bed and breakfast in Edmonton, where the former owner's wife was murdered in a jealous rage, and she is still there. So, again, violence can cause ghosts. Who's to say? Tragedy and violence gives us ghosts. But now let's move on a little bit. Because we've looked at the ghosts and they absolutely fit very much to all that we know to cause ghosts. We know for in fact that ghosts are caused by tragedy or by violence. We know that ghosts can be merely there and don't do anything, no matter how much they might freak you out. But ghosts can become violent, and some of them, it seems, particularly those that are very angry, can absolutely have an effect on the physical world. So it seems that we have to say that the more angry the ghost, or the more traumatized the ghost in their death, the more likely it is that they will be able to have an effect on the physical world. We know that ghosts seemed very much to be tied to specific locations, and it is arguable that if they are a ghost, they cannot leave, which may or may not be an important factor. Um, we know that they cause cold spots, so we do not know why. And certainly, if anyone has an opinion, I'd like to hear it, because absolutely that's something that does need explicating. Um, we can say that we don't know why that actually happens, but nevertheless, it does. Um, so we shall see what else we can discover about ghosts as we go along through our series, but we do know that um, they vary in their kind, good and bad, just like people. But now we are going to jump to the cryptids of Canada, and the reason for that is we want to see if we can find them that fit to the varying types. Now, as the types do, excuse me, have some more coffee and get the throat a little bit. There we go. We find that you get different types of cryptids, and the categories, if you will, that we can say that they fall into are cryptids specific just to that culture and area, which tend to be the stranger variety. Cryptids which, by and large, seem to be stories that grew out of um, very old stories of animals of an earlier age. So, giant versions of wolves and lions and such, which absolutely were real. We know that for archaeological fact, and so the stories have come down and given us some form of cryptid. And then the most interesting variety, where it's one that other cultures seem to share, despite the fact they have nothing else in common. So we have the Wendigo, though the explanation of why is different from other parts of America. Um, Nevertheless, it's basically the same creature. It's cannibalistic, and it has a semi animalistic appearance. And at one particular time or another, it was an ordinary human being, whether it is a ghost that takes over an innocent human or whether it is a particularly awful human that thereafter becomes a Wendigo varies, but nevertheless, it is the Wendigo. Then there's the Ogopogo, which is one of those cryptids that basically it is the same as the Loch Ness Monster. It is a giant dinosaur-like creature that lives in the Arkangan Lake in British Columbia. And it fits to our kinds of cryptids that are perhaps dinosaur-like, which certainly did exist and therefore may be carried down stories of such things, because it seems, in fact, despite what the popular science tells you, dinosaurs did exist at the same time as early humans, so perhaps these are memories. The next one, of course, is extremely well known and 100% uh, is found in multiple cultures, though here's an interesting one. This particular creature in many of the Americas and the Asias is very large. In Africa, it is very small. And I refer, of course, to the Sasquatch, which in America is referred to as Bigfoot, a large, hairy, ape like creature believed to inhabit forests um, all across America, including Canada. But we have seen the same kind of creatures in multiple other countries and cultures as well, described much the same with slight differences. And yes, you absolutely get them in Canada, and in Canada they are large, just like the North American version and unlike the African versions. Um, we know, of course, you have the Yeti in Asia, particularly in Tibet, and that is basically a snow version of much the same thing, and the Sasquatch appears to be that as well. Now, the next interesting one goes back to our cryptids that seem to hark back to those things that were around before modern animals, and that is the wahila, which is a wolf cryptid which is reported in the Nahanni Valley, especially, and in Alaska, which is a very large wolf and fits to descriptions which really would be the prehistoric version. So, absolutely um, not a problem at all for seeing how that might turn about. As yes, these things certainly did exist, and who knows, maybe some remnants lasted for long enough for the stories to turn up. However, the next one is interesting because it's far more modern and it fits to stories we've seen in other countries and cultures as well, and that is one called the Musi, which is a very large black dog. Now, black dogs are found all over the world, ghostly creatures that howl in the night and appear and sometimes will chase you. Um, some say that they can physically affect you and bite and claw at you. How true that is depends on the story, it seems. But they absolutely do exist in more than one country and culture, so we must add them to our list of the possibles. But dogs, as we know, by and large, are, at least from the historical point of view, fairly recent developments from wolves, etc. And so only a few thousand years old, so would be modern as cryptids go. Then, of course, you have an adlet, which is from Inuit folklore, which is a winged demon. And now this one is very interesting because it fits to a certain degree to stories that are not so far from a number of the dragon stories, though this one is more demonic than dragonish. Um, Large, flying, and potentially quite scary. So, somewhere between the jinn or shadow folk, which is an important cryptid that we have encountered in many, many places all around the world and in different cultures. But this is the first time that we have one that can fly with wings. Though certainly all of the shadow people or jinn are known, in fact, to be able to travel in multiple and mysterious ways. So there is no doubt about that, let us say. The next well-known cryptid, of course, is the Thestis lake monster, which is just like the Ogopogo a dinosaur-like creature in the Thetis Lake in British Columbia. And then, rather interestingly, and I think this is absolutely one that has been um, influenced strongly, shall we say, by modern sharing of myths, as it were, is the Canadian chupacabra. The mere fact that they call it a chupacabra shows that it is one that really has been influenced by the South American stories, and this is a small dog-like cryptid that is said to attack farm animals and such. Um, but I think is probably not one we need to worry too much about, simply because. But there are a fair selection of these uh, cryptids that are seen around, and which I think we can consider to fit to all three categories of cryptids that we have discovered. Um, Now, of course, what exactly they are is sometimes difficult to pin down precisely because the stories vary greatly. But what we are most interested in is the following. Um, First of all, we have ghoul-like creatures, which we find in multiple countries and cultures. Here they call it the Wendigo and have specific reasons as to why they appear. However, it is true to say that the main folklore remains the same: cannibalistic, evil, shadow creature type being that feeds on human flesh, so fits to the ghoul um, form, if you will. You have much the same in India that haunts the crematoriums there, and will absolutely attempt to eat any that they can find um, in that way. What's interesting as well, it seems that except for in modern stories and movies, I don't know if any of you people ever watched 30 Days of Night. If not, it is one of the absolute classic vampire movies, and if you like vampires at all, you absolutely have to watch it. It's a requirement. Um, and of course, that is set in Alaska. Um, but actually, there is no historical mythology um, that speaks of vampires in Canada, and I suppose you might argue that it's just too damn cold. Um, but that makes three countries where there is no vampire or vampire-like being. And I know for fact in the other two, they have very high productions and consumptions of garlic, which may or may not be the reason. But to the best of my knowledge, that is not the case with Canada. So why no vampires there? It's a strange one to wonder. However, they have all of the expected vampires. Oh, sorry about that. All of the expected cryptids that you would think that they would have the dinosaur variety or prehistoric animal variety cryptids, absolutely, which you find all over the world because they are stories of prehistoric animals. There are one or two that are slightly weird and interesting and are specific just to Canada, but we have a couple that are from around the world. And right there, that's where we need to start looking as what may or may not um, be important, if you will. Um, there are several different varieties of, certainly Wendigos in general um, are found in a couple of places, but mostly the Americas, but still gals are found in many places. So I think that we can say that that would count. Bigfoot are found all over the world. So absolutely, I think we can happily say that that definitely counts as a common cryptid. Ghosts, of course, are found in every country of the world and fit to all the rules you would expect. Nevertheless, uh, so those count. There are sea-type creatures, the Cadborosaurus, which is basically a sea serpent type thing that appears off the coast. But again, it is a large reptile-like creature that fits the dinosaur form of thing. Now, one cryptid which is really quite funny, um, and is only found in Canada, and which I strongly believe began its life largely just as a joke, is the fur-bearing trout, a legendary creature found in folklore in both Canada and Iceland. Um, it is basically a trout with a thick coat of fur to maintain its heat, and tales of furry fish date to pre-17th century. So maybe, but I think we would not be blamed if in this specific case we kind of said, yeah, nah, it's probably uh, a bit of a made up one, that one. I don't know. They do, however, have a dragon, a meteor dragon, the Garciendaitha, from Seneca mythology, which is a giant serpent that dwells deep in rivers, as often is the case, but it is fire-breathing, which makes it analogous to some of the European dragons. So perhaps, uh, not something we can be completely uh, certain of, but nevertheless, a creature that we find most interesting. They do, however, also have the lutin, which is a kind of goblin-like creature, which again fits to the elf stories of a number of other cultures. So perhaps um, they do I must say, have a hell of a lot of Loch Ness monster type creatures all over Canada. To be fair, the area is very large, so there is that. They do have a creature which is a kind of werewolf, which is matched particularly by the Cajun stories of the Rougarou. So there is a kind of um, werewolf, can we call, in Canada. And most interestingly for the Scottish among you, they have a version of a selkie. Now, what is a selkie? A selkie is a very interesting creature that is essentially a Scottish shapeshifter, um, supposed to be able to change into a seal. But in the Canadian version, the selkie, while its name is very, very similar, it is more of a 15-foot long sea monster rather than um, the cute and wonderful uh, Selkies. Hey, Karina, welcome, welcome. I'm glad you could join us at least. It's wonderful to see you. I hope things are going well and the fires there in Canada are not affecting you too much. You will be pleased to know we're talking Canadian mythology and ghosts today. So let us go on, and if you find anything that you think is untrue, Karina, please say my net. Ne. So let us go on to a little bit more about the Wendigo to see if we can say anything um, about it. Now, it is said, I cannot prove or disprove this, that the original Wendigo does in fact come from Canada, from the Algonquin folklore, and moved down as things went, so to speak. So absolutely, it is truly from Canadian history. Um, it's become very popular in modern movies and in books, and it is absolutely malevolent no matter which story you get to. It is partially human and in some kind of occasion may appear as fully human, allowing it to um, move in and out of normal society. But it, in this specific variety in Canada, possesses and controls their victim to turn them into cannibals and commit murders. They may or may not become larger in size once they take over a person, or at least when they begin to hunt. They appear wolf like, as a cross between a human and a wolf. They are said to have a heart made entirely of ice, and you can tell that they are approaching by their foul stench and sudden terrible cold. Um, in modern psychology, the disorder known as Wendigo psychosis uh, refers to the desire to become a cannibal or to eat human flesh, and it's considered in medicine, at least, to be a culture bound syndrome. I would argue that I think you get cannibals in quite a few cultures. In some First Nations communities, the symptoms um, appear and are thought to be Wendigo psychosis. I'm pretty certain there are plenty of stories in many cultures that are exactly the same. So I would say it doesn't fit only to First Nation groups by any manner or form, but it may be symptomatic of the human experience. And there's a rose there from Karina. Oh, you're such a sweetheart. Thank you so much. You are a true darling, a good friend of mine. Now, as we go on, we can say that it's not only the Algonquin that have this view of ghostly possession that causes cannibalism. It seems that the Wechuge appears in the Athabascan peoples on the northwest Pacific coast, and again, cannibalistic. So, absolutely, it is a common view. We know it has gone down into North America and in the tribes there. Um, the name may come from a number of possible places. The modern Wendigo, which is an English corruption of older words, as it were, may come from Cree, Wituko, with possibly borrowing from Ojibwe, Windigu, which obviously people have a tendency to make easier for the English tongue in modern stories. Um, such as the amazing story by Algernon Blackwood, which was written in 1910, which was a novel called The Wendigo. It's possible that this comes from Wiintekoa, which is Proto-Algonquian for the word meaning owl. Who knows? Many of the First Nation tribes will tell you all about this right down through the Americas and Canada, um, at least in the North Americas. And all of them say they are supernatural, malevolent, cannibalistic, and are strongly associated with winter, cold, famine, and starvation. So that makes quite a lot of sense. They are said to be gaunt to the point of emaciation, with desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones, the bones giving it an angular and ash grey skeletal form of death, half human, half wolf like, with the eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. A recently disinterred skeleton with lips tattered and bloody, unclean and suffering from suppuration of the flesh, giving off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and hunger. So a charming creature that you probably don't want to uh, meet in any of its forms. So it is the embodiment of gluttony, greed, and excess, never satisfied, killing and consuming as much as it can. So we shall return to them, of course, in another uh, of our lives when we talk about those other places. But let's jump across to our favorite friend, the Sasquatch, which a great many people say they have seen. And of course, in 1967, they claimed at least to catch on film a Bigfoot. Did they? Well, it's a blurry picture, and we are not entirely sure, so perhaps they didn't, perhaps they didn't. But Sasquatch, more commonly referred to as Bigfoot, is a large, hairy creature said to inhabit the forests in North America, Pacific Northwest especially, and features in American and Canadian folklore, and since the mid-20th century has become a cultural icon. So modern stories abound, movies abound, and enthusiasts have offered various forms of very dubious evidence to support. So maybe they are real and maybe they are not. But as one person said, given that they are supposed to be the hide and seek champion of the world, uh, how will we ever know for sure? Um, Can we ever say any of the evidence is true? Well, some will tell you with absolute certainty they totally exist, and others will tell you with absolute certainty it is complete and utter rubbish. I don't know, but we never can tell. Um, it certainly is reasonable, I think, because we know that you get giant gorillas in Africa. You get large monkeys like the orangutan in Borneo. So why not? Maybe they are extinct now, but why should they not have existed in the Americas? It seems quite reasonable, and perhaps some lost ones still do. But we can find tales of wild hair-colored humanoids right across the world. The southeastern United States have the skunk ape. You have the Almas, the Yeren, the Yeti in Asia, the Australian Yowie. We haven't even gone to Australia yet. So there are a whole ton of them. They are said to be ape-like, bipedal. They may or may not be more supernatural than not, but these tend to be the more physical of the cryptids rather than um, the more spiritually orientated cryptids. They are said to have eyeshine, which is not known in any human or any known great ape. But other animals, such as owls, raccoons, and so on, absolutely do have eyeshine. These are said to have eyeshine, if that helps at all, and they are apparently said to stink. Imagine a skunk that has rolled around in dead animals and then hung around the garbage pits, which sounds charming as hell, but there you go. How big are they? Well, it seems that they can be big enough that between 8 inches wide and 24 inches long, some containing claw marks in the footprints that have been found. Don't know, don't know. As I say, in Africa, we have the small version, so who's to say? Uh, I think it's fair to say that Bigfoot has been a favorite for a very, very long time and will remain such. The last of the cryptids to talk about, of course, is the rougarou, which is a corruption in many ways um, of the French loup-garou, um, which we would call a werewolf. Um, there are different spellings, especially around the Cajun diaspora, where language and oral traditions are strong, and there are all sorts of influences from the different tribes and from both English and French that have added their versions, if you will. The creature known as the rougarou may well be connected to the loup-garou from France. We haven't gone to France yet, but we will. Loup, as we know, is French for wolf, and a garou is the Frankish um, version, also meaning wolf. Um, and basically, they're talking about a man who transforms into a wolf, which is your basic werewolf. It's very strong uh, in many places around the world, but in Canada, you do get them apparently um, through French Canadian immigrants, perhaps. It's possible. Um, they may well have mixed the stories in with the Wendigo legends. So there is that. And ultimately, it is someone cursed with lycanthropy that hunts people. Now, it's interesting because there are a lot of ways to become a werewolf, but not in Canada. In Canada, it is only a curse. There are no voluntary werewolves in Canada, and there are no natural born werewolves in Canada, only cursed ones. So, we shall see. The one rather fun but unprovable story about werewolves in Canada involved a claim that one was spotted, and some guy decided he was going to go out and find the damn thing, and he said, if it is real, I will shoot it and bring it back. And he went out with a great deal of intent to hunt down this beast. And he was known, in fact, in the area, apparently, to be a very, very good hunter and one of the toughest buggers around, of course. Why not? But his body was later found clawed up and half eaten by something large and wolf-like. So, did he find what he was hunting And did it hunt him back? I suppose we can never know. But we have reached the end of our Canadian examination, and we need to have a certain amount of summary. We have a number of creatures which absolutely are common around the world. We know that werewolves are common. We know that Bigfoot is common. We have a couple that are only found around Canada. But we have found more reasons to say that what we know about ghosts, at least, fits to what everybody says about ghosts. So perhaps we can be absolutely certain that ghosts are pretty much what everybody says. We seem to agree no matter religion or culture. We still haven't entirely answered one question, and that is certainly religious items and prayer is meant to hold off both cryptids and ghosts, especially the evil ones. But nobody can tell me, it seems, how effective these items or prayers might be dependent on the faith level of the user. But then, as one cynic pointed out to me when I asked him about it, a mate of mine who is a terrible cynic, he said, "Believe me, if you find yourself face to face with a poltergeist, you can be damned certain you believe in God." And that is a pretty fair point to make. So perhaps in that moment, your holy items will be working at full and maximum capacity. But that said, we need to at some stage also take a brief look in some of the modern technology that they say can be used in terms of ghosts and so forth, as well as some of the older and traditional technology, such as it is, and what we think about those, and to discuss a number of the things that surround that. I know in South Africa, Ouija boards are not big at all, and I know of nobody that even owns one. So they're not really a thing for South Africa. However, just about every teenager ever has at one stage or another either done or knows somebody who has done the game of Glassy Glassy. I'm sure Karina will agree with me on that. There is no doubt that that seems to be the way that in South Africa you are introduced at least to the idea of terrifying yourself to the point of pant-wetting horror. So yes, Karina knows that too. So absolutely, that's the way things are here. But there is a lot of more modern stuff. You have your EVPs and ghost recorders and specialized cameras, and we're going to need to talk about that kind of thing and our opinion on whether or not it does work and why it might work if it does, or if we think it's absolute crap. I know for a fact that from my time in the church, no priest who is trained as an exorcist uses any of those items whatsoever. Um, so they're not a thing that is considered usable or necessary from a religious standpoint. But as we know, ghost hunters absolutely swear by them and quite possibly at them. So we need to answer a number of questions now. We have a version of the shadow people on just about every continent and culture and place around the world. So we need to think long and hard and decide whether or not these things are actually real. We don't know. But there seems to be a fair amount of evidence. We pretty much have come to the conclusion from the comments already that ghosts definitely exist, though what they can do and how far they can go is arguable, and whether or not you can speak to them or ought to speak to them is another argument entirely. Um, if there is a way to get them to move on and find peace, it sounds like a good thing. There is an argument that no, ghosts don't exist whatsoever, and in fact, what you think is a ghost is no more than a demon. So maybe, I suppose that's a matter of belief and opinion. We will need to come to a conclusion there, and I suspect it may very well not be a satisfactory one, but we shall do our best and try. Um, and then, of course, we need to start saying, does this matter? If ghosts do absolutely exist, do we care? Do we just say, well, things happen as long as they don't bother me, I won't bother them? Um, or do we need to say that it does matter? It changes our view of the world. Um, as with the jinn or shadow people, we've seen that they seem to be very real people with a society and all of that, just like humans are. They just don't entirely exist in this world, but they are not ghosts, they are not demons, they are not angels, they are not spirits. They are semi-physical, partially corporeal creatures that somehow can slip between dimensions, perhaps, or worlds, perhaps, depending on how you look at it. And as such, you get good ones, you get bad ones, you get all kinds of ones. So, without a doubt, there are something out there that needs explicating. If there is an entire other set of people out there that we didn't know about, maybe we ought to. And then, of course, on the further side, which we haven't even got near to yet, but will in due course, I suppose, if we can get through all of the world's cryptids and ghosts, we need to talk about angels and demons and what they might be, and whether or not we think things like that exist, and how and where and why. So we have a long way to go. So do not think we shall not be around for a very long time. Live from the Drakensberg here, me, Strange Bones, discussing the weird and the wonderful. So remember, like, subscribe, share, join, and remember that this is going to be a very, very interesting journey for us all. And if nothing else, perhaps we will learn a little something as we go along. Um, if only how to give ourselves nightmares. So remember, make sure you stay safe. Make sure that you sleep with one eye open, and perhaps keep a little holy water and a blessed object near at hand, just in case, because you never know. Maybe all of these things are no more than your imagination. Maybe it's just stories and rubbish. And maybe, just maybe, it's not. So I'll see you tomorrow. And do send me a message if there is a place you would particularly like to see next. I do try to jump around the world a bit so that we mix things up. Um, and there's a lot of places still to go. We have, let's see, we have done South Africa, Cote d'Ivoire. We have done Portugal, Mexico, Canada, Korea. So a fair number of places uh, around the world, but we do need somewhere else, somewhere new, somewhere different that we can cover to talk about the strange, the interesting, the twisted, and quite possibly the terrifying. We did do Wales as well, did we not? Um, but we need somewhere else. So if there's somewhere that you would particularly like done, let me know. Otherwise, we will find somewhere interesting for tomorrow night at around 10 when we start to look at the weird and the wonderful. And until then, good night, sleep sweet, and don't have too many horrifying dreams.